Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle.
Hello and welcome to the weekly discussion of the explained section from the Indian Express. So this is the third week of our discussion, and in this we have taken up these articles from the explained section. And we will be covering these articles from the prelims examination and the mains examination perspective. And in this we will not be covering or repeating the articles that have already been discussed in the Daily News Simplified. And we'll be providing you with a reference of the videos in which we have already discussed some of the articles that have appeared in the explained section. So let us start our discussion.
So in last week's Indian Express explained section, you might have seen these two news articles and they are related to the exploration of Mars. Now Mars exploration was in news in the last week because UAE had completed its HOPE mission on the Mars planet. Also, NASA's Mars mission, which is known by the name Perseverance, has also been completed. And again, China's Tianwen-1 is also in pipeline, and partially it has been completed and will be completed very soon in the month of May. So this naturally brings us to the question as to why is Mars so interesting to the scientists. Now, besides these two news articles, if you look at this news article, this was also published in the Indian Express. However, it was published when India had completed or sent its Mars orbiter mission successfully. And this is famously known as the Mangal. So accordingly, when this news article appeared in the newspapers, there was a question that was asked in the prelims examination in the year 2016. And it was related to India's successful Mars mission. And accordingly, in this article, we'll try and discuss the key aspects of the three Mars missions that have been news related to UAE, the NASA's Perseverance and the China's Tianwen-1. And after that, we will look into the question as to why has there been a flurry of Mars missions recently, or why is everyone interested in the Mars presently. But before looking at these aspects, let us solve this question that was asked in the prelims of 2016. It reads, consider the following statements the Mangalyaan launched by ISRO. The first is that it is also called the Mars Orbiter mission, which is quite obvious from this headline. Second is that it made India the second country to have spacecraft orbit the Mars after USA. And third statement is that it made India the only country to be successful in making its spacecraft orbit the Mars in its very first attempt. Now this was a unique fact related to the success of India's Mangalyaan mission because India was the only country till then to be successful in making its spacecraft orbit the Mars in its very first attempt. However, the second statement that was given here was incorrect because besides India and USA, the European Union and the China's space agencies have also successfully completed the spacecraft orbiting the Mars. And accordingly, the correct answer that came out was 1 and 3 only. So now let us look at which all Mars missions have currently been in news and what are they likely to achieve if they successfully bring out the observations from the Mars planet. So as you might have all seen in the newspapers that these were the Mars missions that were in news. Obviously, this is related to India's Mangalyaan, about which a question has already been asked. However, the other three important Mars missions that were in news were from UAE and it is known as the HOPE mission. Second one is from the United States of America and its space agency NASA, and this is known as the Perseverance rover. And finally, the third important one that is in news is from China and it is known as Tianwen-1. Now let us look at what are the objectives of these Mars missions that have been launched by various countries. So as far as United Arab Emirates HOPE mission is concerned, it will try to study the atmosphere of Mars. And it will try to seek answers to the questions that is how and why Mars lost its atmosphere. And this question is particularly important for scientists because the loss of atmosphere was seen to be responsible for the loss of surface water in Mars. And because of this, the hospitable environment for life was also lost on the planet of Mars. Regarding the China's Tianwen mission, it will look for water underneath the Martian surface. And accordingly, the Tianwen-1's rover is scheduled to land at Utopia Planitia, which is a location with possible ancient groundwater deposits. So these are the aims or objectives of these two missions that have been in news. However, the most important one that is currently in news is the NASA's Perseverance rover. So let us look at some important facts related to this Perseverance rover. Now, first and foremost, this Perseverance rover of NASA has landed at a location known as the Zezero crater, and this was likely filled with water in the past according to estimates by the scientists. Further, this NASA's Perseverance rover aims at finding fossils or some biosignatures which are known as hints of life in either the chemical measurements or the morphological observations. So, according to its observations, it will also look into the signatures or the hints of life that it finds on the Mars's surface. Now, besides these two objectives, the Perseverance rover will produce oxygen on the Martian surface for the first time, and it will do so by using the atmospheric carbon dioxide from the Martian atmosphere. And accordingly, it will have an instrument which is known as MOXIE, or the Mars Oxygen In Situ Resource Utilization Experiment, and this aims at producing oxygen on the surface of the Mars. Besides these two important objectives, the Perseverance rover will also take some rock samples, and these rock samples will be returned to Earth by a subsequent mission by the European Space Agency along with NASA. And further, this Perseverance rover also carries a radar imager for Mars's subsurface experiment, and it is known as RIMFAX. And this RIMFAX will provide high resolution mapping of the subsurface structures at the landing site. And this instrument will also look for subsurface water on the Mars, and if it is found on the surface, it will greatly help the case for a human mission or the cause of a human settlement on the Mars. Now, it is interesting to note that a private agency known as SpaceX, which has been launched by Elon Musk, aims at achieving manned mission on the surface of the Mars. And accordingly, such kind of discoveries of subsurface water and also the production of oxygen by using the atmospheric carbon dioxide of the Mars planet will be very useful in making the manned mission successful to the Mars planet. So after this, let us look at what is the SpaceX agency of Elon Musk trying to achieve. So SpaceX is a private US based company which has been promoted by Elon Musk, and this SpaceX has a long range goal of starting a commercial service to transport passengers to the Mars. So this is primarily the objective of this SpaceX by the Elon Musk. Now the name of this mission is known as the Starship because it aims at transporting passengers to the Mars planet. Now this Starship mission promises to reduce the mission costs by more than 95 to 99% by using multiple innovations like refueling the spacecraft in the orbit, manufacturing of rocket fuel on Mars using the materials that are found on the Mars itself. So it is still working on such kind of innovations, and it aims at sending passengers to the Mars in the near future. However, as far as the present technology is concerned, producing oxygen on the Mars is one of the biggest challenge. And as we have seen that this Persever rover is also trying to achieve this objective of producing oxygen on the surface of the Mars by an experiment known as MOXIE. And success of the manned missions depends upon the oxygen production if the Perseverance rover is successful in achieving this. So if this MOXIE experiment of the Perseverance rover of NASA is successful, it will help in achieving two important needs of the human beings for achieving or completing the manned missions. First is that it will provide oxygen for breathing, and secondly, it will provide rocket fuel for the trip back to Earth. So these are the two important objectives that this MOXIE experiment is likely to achieve through its Perseverance rover of the NASA. Now, why has there been such a fascination with the planet Mars? So, first is because of the possibility of life on Mars. Second is because it is the only planet which seems feasible for human visit. And also, it has been because of the techno nationalism that is seen across the globe presently. Now, regarding the possibility of life on the Mars, Mars is the planet where life may have evolved in the past. and life evolved on Earth around 3.8 billion years ago. Now, conditions on early Mars around 4 billion years ago were very similar to that of Earth. Further, it had a thick atmosphere which enabled the stability of water on the surface of Mars. And if the conditions on the Mars were similar to those on the Earth, there is a real possibility that microscopic life might have evolved on Mars. And accordingly, various missions by various space agencies are trying to ascertain the possibility of life on the Mars. And that will be seen as the biggest breakthrough because life has not been found outside the Earth. Further, Mars is the only planet that humans can visit or inhabit in the long term in the near future. And this is because the other two planets which are in the vicinity of Earth, that is Venus and the Mercury, have extreme temperatures. And the average temperature on some of these planets is greater than 400 degrees Celsius. So clearly, no manned mission can be made successful on these planets which have high degree of heat. Further, all the planets in the outer solar system, that is beyond Mars, starting from Jupiter, are made of gas and are not made of silicates or rocks. And also, these are very cold. However, as compared to these planets, Mars is comparatively hospitable in terms of temperature, which has an approximate range between 20 degrees centigrades at the equator of the Mars to about minus 125 degrees centigrade at the poles. So, this means that the atmosphere or the temperature is quite hospitable near equator on the planet Mars. So besides the possibility of life on Mars, the Mars planet seems to be the only feasible planet where human beings can visit till now. And that is because of the conditions which are similar to that of Earth there. And besides these two factors, we see that there has been rise of techno nationalism. And such kind of techno nationalism was also seen during the Cold War era. And when the United States of America and the erstwhile USSR were competing with each other to gain prowess in the space technology. And a similar kind of thing can be seen presently also. And this is because China, for example, is in a kind of space race with neighbors like India and Japan. Further, UAE, which has recently completed its HOPE mission, is projecting itself as being the first Arab country to do so. Now, besides nations indulging themselves in a kind of space race, billionaires have also shown their interest in space missions. For example, Elon Musk has promised through the Starship project to launch people to Mars by 2026. And besides this, Jeff Bezos, who was the CEO of Amazon, has also resigned recently to focus on his space venture known as Blue Origin. So in this discussion, we have seen clearly the importance of Mars planet and why is everybody fascinated with the planet Mars. Also, we have seen key facts related to three important Mars missions that are seen regularly in the news articles. And accordingly, questions can be asked from these three Mars missions and also why are so many missions being projected towards Mars planet can also be asked in your mains examination. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, the next article that we are discussing from the explained section is related to the National Hydrogen Mission of India, about which there was an announcement in the recent budget of the Government of India. And also in this discussion, we'll look at how hydrogen can be used as a fuel and what are the pros and cons of using hydrogen as an alternative fuel. Now, some of the points that we discuss here can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And this is because if you look at these two questions, they were all related to new kind of fuels that are being introduced. For example, this question was asked in the prelims of 2019. And this question related to fuel cells which also uses hydrogen rich fuel was asked in the prelims of 2015. And accordingly, the hydrogen as a fuel or an alternative fuel becomes very important for us from the preliminary examination point of view because questions have been continuously repeated in the prelims examination related to the hydrogen fuel. So let us look at some important aspects of hydrogen as an alternative fuel and also what are the challenges in fully implementing the hydrogen as an alternative fuel to the presently used fossil fuels like petrol, diesel, etc. But before looking at the discussion, let us try to solve these two questions that were asked in the prelims of 2015 and 2019. So the question that was asked in 2015 reads, with reference to the fuel cells in which hydrogen-rich fuel and oxygen are used to generate electricity, consider the following statements. First is that if pure hydrogen is used as a fuel, the fuel cell emits heat and water as byproducts. And second statement is that the fuel cells can be used for powering buildings and not for small devices like laptop computers. And third statement is that the fuel cells produce electricity in the form of alternating currents. Now, if you are aware of the basics of the production of electricity, you might be knowing that alternating current can only be produced by the use of electromagnetic induction. And accordingly, if electricity is produced in the fuel cells, it does not lead to the generation of alternating current, but it produces direct current. And that is why you can eliminate options B, C, and D clearly. So the correct answer that comes out is A, that is one only. That is, if pure hydrogen is used as a fuel, the fuel cell emits heat and water as byproducts, which is correct. Second question reads, in the context of the proposals to use of hydrogen enriched CNG or HCNG as the fuel for buses in public transport, consider the following statements. Now this question was asked in 2019 because the Delhi government was introducing the hydrogen enriched CNG or the HCNG buses in Delhi. And accordingly, the statements read, the main advantage of the use of HCNG is the elimination of carbon monoxide emissions. Second is that the HCNG as a fuel reduces carbon dioxide and hydrocarbon emissions. Third is that the hydrogen up to 1/5 by the volume can be blended with CNG as fuel for buses. And fourth statement is that the HCNG makes the fuel less expensive than the CNG. Now, if you look at this first statement, when the CNG is enriched with hydrogen, it cannot completely eliminate carbon monoxide emissions. And that is why you can easily eliminate the options A and D. Because even after enriching the CNG with hydrogen, it will still emit some amount of carbon monoxide. And second statement is clearly true because that is the sole purpose of mixing or enriching CNG with hydrogen. That is, it will reduce the emissions of carbon dioxide and the hydrocarbons. And the third statement that is given here is also correct because the Delhi government was planning to enrich the CNG by mixing up to 20% hydrogen. That is 1/5 of the total volume of the CNG. And hence, the option B comes out to be correct. That is 2 and 3 only. So similarly, in our discussion, we will look at some important points that become very important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Now, you might all be knowing that hydrogen is the most common element that is found in nature. However, the issue here is that hydrogen is not found freely in the nature. And accordingly, hydrogen exists only combined with other elements and has to be extracted from naturally occurring compounds, for example, water. And as we note that the chemical composition of water is H2O. That is, hydrogen is found in a combined form with oxygen in the form of water, and accordingly it can also be found in different compounds like ammonia, whose chemical formula is NH3. So clearly hydrogen is not freely found in nature, and accordingly it can be extracted from these naturally occurring compounds. But the issue here is that although hydrogen brings the promise of clean fuel, the process of extracting it is very energy intensive. So that is one of the challenges in using the hydrogen as a fuel. And based on the sources and the processes by which hydrogen is derived, it is categorized according to different colors. So for example, grey hydrogen is that hydrogen that is extracted from the hydrocarbons, for example, the fossil fuels and the natural gas. And here the issue is that the byproduct is carbon dioxide. That is, even in the extraction of hydrogen from these hydrocarbons, there will be some amount of pollution that will occur in the environment. Second type of hydrogen that is extracted is known as the blue hydrogen. It is also sourced from fossil fuels. However, in the extraction of blue hydrogen, the emissions or the byproducts, for example, the carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, are captured and stored. And accordingly, it is less polluting as compared to the grey hydrogen, whose byproduct is carbon dioxide. However, the best form of hydrogen is the green hydrogen, and it is generated from renewable energy like solar and wind, and the electricity that is generated by these renewable energy sources then splits the water into hydrogen and oxygen. And accordingly, the byproduct here is water and water vapor, which are non-polluting in nature. And that is why green hydrogen is of interest in countries which are facing the issue of pollution and also aiming to fight the global warming. So now some of the advantages of using the green hydrogen is that it is a clean burning molecule which can decarbonize a range of sectors, for example, the iron and steel, chemicals and transportation. So these are some of the uses where green hydrogen can be used. Further, the renewable energy that cannot be stored or cannot be used by the grid of electricity can then be channeled to produce hydrogen. So that is how you can put the renewable energy to use for the production of hydrogen or green hydrogen as a fuel. So this brings us to the next question as to how hydrogen can be used as fuel. So hydrogen is used as a fuel through the mechanism known as fuel cell, and about which we already note that UPSC has asked question in the year 2015. That is, UPSC is always ahead of its time. So a fuel cell is simply that cell which converts chemical energy into electrical energy using oxidizing agents through an oxidation reduction reaction. And fuel cell based vehicles mostly combine hydrogen and oxygen to produce electricity to power the electric motor which is used to run these vehicles. And as these fuel cell run vehicles use electricity to run, they are considered as a type of electric vehicles. Now, other type of electrical vehicles can be those vehicles which use lithium ion batteries and are charged by our regular electricity. However, these fuel cells have a mechanism of producing electricity by the way of the reaction or the chemical reaction that takes place. Now, inside these fuel cells, hydrogen is drawn from an onboard pressurized tank and is made to react with a catalyst which is known as platinum. So basically, inside a fuel cell, hydrogen reacts with a catalyst known as platinum. And as this hydrogen passes through this catalyst, it is stripped of its electrons. And these electrons are then forced to move along an external circuit and which produces an electrical current which is known as direct current. So it is basically involving chemical energy that is being converted into electrical energy. Now this direct current that is produced is used by the electric motor to power the vehicle. And the only byproduct here is water and water vapor. So basically, hydrogen fuel cell cars have a near zero carbon footprint, which is not possible or which is not the case in other electric vehicles. Further, regarding hydrogen, it is about 2 to 3 times as efficient as burning petrol because an electric chemical reaction is much more efficient than the combustion that takes place in the normal petrol or diesel run vehicles. So the key points to be remembered here are that in a fuel cell, chemical energy is converted into electrical energy. Further, platinum is used as a catalyst, and when hydrogen reacts with this catalyst, it releases an electron. And that electron is then made or forced to move along an external circuit. And through this, an electrical current is produced and which is used to run the electric vehicles. Advantage of using fuel cells is that they have a near zero carbon footprint. And also, hydrogen is more efficient as compared to burning of petrol and diesel. So now through the National Hydrogen Mission which was announced in the recent budget, the government of India aims to decarbonize by 2050. And in this, hydrogen as an alternative fuel is being considered. Now we already know that India has the ambitious goal of producing 175 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2022. And in the recent budget of 2021 and 22, there was an allocation of rupees 1500 crore for renewable energy development and hydrogen energy mission. So we all know that India's electricity is heavily dependent on coal for its production. And as such, hydrogen has the promise of replacing these fossil fuels and is also helpful in addressing the issues of pollution and oil price rise. And we all know that India heavily depends upon the import of fossil fuels or the crude oil from the West Asian countries. Second advantage of using hydrogen as a fuel is that it is the most abundant element in the universe and is lighter, energy dense and 2 to 3 times more efficient than burning petrol. Further, it will benefit transportation because it contributes to about 1/3 of India's greenhouse gas emissions and can also be used in iron and steel and chemical sectors. Now, another important thing that you need to learn here is that there are different types of electric vehicles. In this first type is the hybrid electric vehicles, second is the battery powered electric vehicles, third one are the plug-in hybrid vehicles, and then there are the fuel cell electric vehicles about which we have read. Now, the advantage of using hybrid electric vehicles is that they use less amount of fuel as compared to normal petrol cars, and there is reduction of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide emissions. However, they are still less efficient as compared to the fuel cell driven electric vehicles. Then there are battery powered electric vehicles which are fully electric, however, they depend upon rechargeable batteries. Now, issue here is that if India deploys these kind of battery powered electric vehicles, the issue here is that electricity is still being produced by coal power plants, and ultimately that will lead to greenhouse gas emissions by those coal plants which are producing electricities for driving these battery powered electric vehicles. So the most efficient type of electric vehicle will be the one which will run on fuel cell. And this is because the only byproduct here is water and water vapor. And that is what is very promising as far as the reduction of greenhouse gases is concerned. So through these infographics, you get to know about the advantages or the pros and cons of using hydrogen as an alternative fuel. So regarding the advantages, first is that it has near zero carbon footprint. Secondly, it can be stored in tanks like CNG and can be integrated into cars. Further, they are lighter than the heavy lithium-ion batteries that are presently being used in most of the electric vehicles, and they can also be used for heavy transportation or long-haul trucks and commercial vehicles. And the most and the biggest advantage is that it can be refueled in 5 minutes only. And we note that a lot of time is required for charging the lithium-ion batteries-based electric vehicles. However, the challenges in using hydrogen as an alternative fuel is that there is lack of infrastructure related to hydrogen as a fuel. And that is because less than 500 hydrogen stations are only present globally. Second issue is related to the safety of using the hydrogen fuel, because there is a lot of explosion risk and because hydrogen is highly combustible. And accordingly, the hydrogen needs to be stored at a very high pressure. And also, there are only 3 manufacturers which use fuel cell technology to run the electric vehicles. So clearly in this discussion, we have got a very good idea about the types of hydrogens, how a fuel cell works, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of using hydrogen as an alternative fuel. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, the next article that is important for us from the exam point of view from the Indian Express Explained is related to the MSP guidelines that have been announced by the central government for sugar mills. Now, minimum support price is a very contentious issue and it keeps on coming in the newspapers regularly. And that is why learning about the MSP system that is related to sugarcane farmers and also related to sugar mills is very important for us from the prelims examination point of view. So before this, let us first look at how questions have been asked from the MSP regime previously in the prelims examinations. So now if you look at these two questions continuously in the year 2018 and in the year 2019, two questions have been asked related to minimum support price. The question that was asked in 2018 is related to the announcement of MSP for which of the following crops. And the question that was asked in 2019 reads, the economic cost of food grains to the Food Corporation of India is minimum support price and bonus paid to the farmers plus. So what does it involve? Now, as far as the question that was asked in 2018, if you all knew that coffee, which is a cash crop, and MSP is not announced by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs for this particular cash crop. And by this, you could have easily eliminated A, C and D. And the correct answer that comes out is B, that is 2, 4 and 6 only. That is MSP is announced for barley, finger millet, groundnut and sesame. And in the 2019 questions, besides the MSP price and the bonus that is paid to the farmers, the third important component of cost for the Food Corporation of India includes the procurement and distribution cost, that is procurement incidentals and the distribution cost. So after this, let us look at how is sugarcane pricing done in India and what are the provisions related to sugarcane pricing and what is meant by the fair and remunerative prices related to sugarcane pricing. And after this, let us look at the MSP that has been announced for sugar. Now, regarding the sugarcane pricing policy, you should first note that it is different from the other MSPs that are announced by the government of India. And in this line, the pricing of sugarcane is governed by the statutory provisions of the Sugarcane Control Order 1966, which has been issued under the Section 3 of the Essential Commodities Act of 1955. However, the other minimum support prices that are announced by the Government of India for various other crops do not have a statutory backing, and that is one of the issues for which farmers are protesting against the farm laws that have been passed by the Government of India. So this is clearly a very important fact for us from prelims examination, that pricing of sugarcane is governed by the statutory provisions of the Sugarcane Control Order, which has been issued under the Essential Commodities Act of 1955. Now, under this order, the central government is authorized to fix the minimum price of sugarcane that is payable by the sugarcane mills to the farmers based on various factors. So, here it is also to be learned that the MSP is not directly announced by the Government of India, or it is not provided by the Government of India to the farmers, but this MSP is payable by the sugar mill owners to the farmers. Now, what are the factors that are used for fixing this minimum price of sugarcane that is payable by the sugarcane mill owners to the farmers? It includes the cost of production of sugarcane, the return to the sugarcane farmers from alternative crops and general trend of prices of agriculture commodities, the availability of sugar to final consumers at a fair price, the price at which sugar is sold by sugar mills, and also the recovery of sugar from sugarcane. So these are some of the factors that are considered by the Government of India for fixing the minimum support price or minimum price of sugarcane that should be paid by the sugarcane mill owners. Now, until 2009, this price that was fixed by the government was known as the statutory minimum price or the SMP. And this was ascertained in consultations with the Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices. That is, the role of Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices was only advisory in nature. And based on the advice or the recommendations of this commission, the Government of India then fixed this statutory minimum price. However, on 22nd October 2009, the central government replaced the SMP with the FRP or the Fair and Remunerative Price regime by amending the Sugarcane Control Order of 1966. So what is meant by this Fair and Remunerative Price regime related to sugarcane pricing in India? Let us understand that. Now, besides the factors that were used by the Government of India for fixing the statutory minimum price, the Government of India provided for an additional factor that will be used to decide the fair and remunerative price. So in this new clause included the reasonable margins for the growers of the sugarcane on the account of risks and profits was inserted as an additional factor for working out the fair and remunerative price. And this was made effective from the 2009-10 sugar season. And this fair and remunerative price regime is now considered to be the final remunerative price for the farmers, which has to be provided by the sugarcane mill owners to provide sufficient profit margins to the farmers right at the outset of the season itself. Now, this FRP is fixed by the central government here. However, the state governments are free to fix their own state advised price or the SAP, and also the millers or the sugarcane mill owners can offer any price above this FRP. So basically, the state advised price, which can be fixed by the state governments, and the price that is offered by the MSP can be over and above the FRP, which sets the floor prices for the sugarcane in India. Now, although FRP or the fair and remunerative prices have been provided for the pricing of sugarcane that needs to be paid to the farmers, the Government of India also introduced the minimum support price for sugar. Now, why was this MSP for sugar introduced in the first place, or what was the issues that was going on related to the sugarcane farming and the production of sugar that the MSP was required? So what was happening was that the mill owners pledged their sugar that was produced by them to the financial institutions to raise working capital well before the sugar season. And these mill owners used to recover this price by selling the sugar through tenders, keeping in view both the cost of production and other margins that are required by them. Now, what used to happen is that the government appointed cane commissioners used to threaten the mill owners in case of failure to clear the FRP dues within 14 days of cane being sold to these mill owners by the farmers. That is, it was required by these cane commissioners that the mill owners should pay to the farmers the fair remunerative price dues within 14 days of the canes that were sold by the farmers to these mill owners. And if they fail to do so, an action would be initiated against these mill owners. So, in order to prevent the attachment of their properties as arrears of land revenue, these mill owners try to accelerate the sales to clear the FRP dues that they owe to the farmers. Now, what happened back in 2018 is that in order to provide the FRP dues to the farmers, the sugarcane mill owners hastily tried to sell the sugar, and this led to a glut or oversupply in the market. And due to this overselling by the sugarcane mill owners, the prices of sugar dropped below rupees 2500 to 2600 levels against the cost of production of the sugar, which came out about rupees 3300. So, in order to stop the distressed sale of sugar by the sugarcane mill owners and to help the sugarcane mill owners to timely generate the capital to help them clear the FRP dues to the farmers, the Government of India introduced the MSP for sugar and also a quota system. What is this? Let us understand. So, in June 2018, the Government of India introduced the minimum support price for sugar and a quota system for each mill owner. And these measures were brought in order to arrest the constant slide or drop in the prices of sugar and to keep the demand and supply ratio under a safe limit. So, in order to check the dropping of the price, the government introduced the MSP, and in order to maintain a safe limit in terms of demand supply ratio, the government introduced a quota system. And it was reasoned by the government that both these measures will help the mill owners to generate enough revenue to pay to their farmers the fair and remunerative prices for the cane that they purchase from the farmers. So clearly we have understood that the sugarcane mill owners have to pay the fair and remunerative prices that are fixed by the central government. And in order to pay their FRP dues within the mandated 14-day period, at times the sugarcane mill owners try to sell their sugar production in a hasty manner. And due to this, what happens is that they sell the sugar produced at a low price as compared to the cost of production, and accordingly they are unable to repay the FRP dues that are due to the farmers. So in order to arrest or check these issues and maintain a proper demand and supply in the sugar market, the Government of India introduced the MSP for the sugar as well as a quota system for the mill owners. So these are few important points, and with this, let's take up the next article. Now, this next article from the Indian Express Explained reads why rising unemployment and not GDP growth is the biggest challenge for India. Now, this debate regarding the unemployment and GDP growth has come up in the background of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we all know that economies across the globe have been hit by COVID-19 pandemic, and that has led to rising unemployment problem in various countries across the globe. So in this regard, a debate has started that how to deal with unemployment and GDP growth rate in countries which have been adversely hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, normally it is said that when the GDP rises, employment situation also improves. However, this is not the case in India because we have seen that even during the high GDP growth rate years for India, unemployment remained a very grave problem to deal with. And accordingly, this debate reads that why rising unemployment and not GDP growth rate is the biggest challenge for India. This is because the GDP is likely to grow in the near future. However, the unemployment situation that India faces, it's not just related to the GDP growth rate, but is related to various structural problems in the Indian economy. So let us look at this debate related to unemployment and GDP growth rate from the General Studies paper 3 point of view in the topic economic development. Now, India's growth story has been termed as jobless growth, and this is because even when India's GDP was growing, the employment situation was not very promising. And accordingly, you can see in the year 2015, a question was asked which reads: the nature of economic growth in India in the recent times is often described as jobless growth. Do you agree with this view? Give arguments in favor of your answer. So clearly, we have been asked to analyze this issue of jobless growth in this question that was asked in 2015. And this issue of jobless growth still remains relevant till date. So, in this regard, let us look at why Indian growth story is termed as jobless growth, what are the reasons for this, and what steps should be taken by the government of India to make or generate more employment along with GDP growth. Now, it is interesting to note here that about Indian economy, it is often said that we have the advantage of demographic dividend. And this mainly represents that its working age population accounts for more than 60% of its population because the population mostly is young in India. And the average age of Indians is expected to be around 29 years in 2020 to 24. However, this average age of population in China and US is expected to be more than 35 years. So clearly, India has the youngest population. So as India has high numbers in the working age population, it is often said that if we are able to create enough jobs for this population, we can turn this demography into demographic dividend. However, as we have seen that the concern here is that even when Indian GDP has witnessed growth, we have not seen commensurate increment in the jobs that are created in the economy. And that is why it has been termed as a jobless growth. So it is also said that if India is not able to produce enough amount of jobs in the economy, this demographic dividend can turn into a demographic disaster. So first let us look at the employment situation in India and what is the contribution of different sectors in the employment and what is the contribution of these sectors in the GDP growth rate first. So if you look at this graph, we note that Indian economy has three sectors: the services sectors, industry and the agriculture. In this regard, the share of these three sectors in the GDP stands at about service sector of 54%. Industry has a weightage or contribution of about 26% in India's GDP, and agriculture contributes to about 15 to 20% roughly. However, when it comes to employment, the service sector contributes only to about 30% job creation in India, while manufacturing sector or industry contributes to about 25% only. However, agriculture, which has the least contribution in the GDP, amounts for the highest employment. That is, agriculture is the biggest employer in India. So clearly, this highlights an issue in the employment situation in India. And that is why, as industry and services sector are not able to produce enough jobs, the growth story of India is termed as jobless growth. So regarding the employee situation in India, as it is being said that it is jobless growth, and this is because there has been stagnation in one of the important sectors, that is the manufacturing sector. And the contribution of the manufacturing sector to the GDP has remained stagnant at about 17% of the GDP since the 1991 reforms or the liberalization, privatization and globalization reforms that Indian economy undertook. Another issue with the employment situation in India is regarding the nature of jobs that India has. And it is said that about 90% of the workforce in India works in the informal sectors, or 90% of the employed youth in India is into informal sectors. So it is said that jobs in the Indian economy have been concentrated in low paying, low productivity informal sectors, for example, the construction, small side enterprises, etc. And accordingly, concerns have been raised over not just over the number of jobs that are created, but also about the quality and the nature of job. Further, because of the slow pace of labor reforms in India, it is being seen that there is growing informalization in the Indian job market. And the share of contractual workers in the manufacturing has increased from 12% in 1999 to 25% in 2010. Now, issue here is that these informal workers or contractual workers are paid almost 20 times less wages as compared to formal workers, and also these workers lack social security benefits. That is why this is also a growing concern regarding the quality of jobs that are being created in India. Now, these informal workers face a number of vulnerabilities, for example, poor wages, lack of access to social security benefits, poor skill set, lack of effective representation through trade unions, and lack of access to basic facilities such as housing and sanitation. Besides this, another important issue that India faces is the decline in the female labor force participation rates. And this has declined from 45% in 1993 to 94 to about 25% in 2017 and 18. Further, regarding the skill training of the workers in India, only about 2% of the workforce is formally trained. And finally, there is mismatch between the annual increase in labor force as compared to the job creation. That is, the labor force is increasing at a rate of 2.2% per annum, while the jobs that are being created in the Indian economy are increasing at a dismal rate of 1.5% per year only. So, all these factors combinedly highlight the employment situation in India, that is, the share of manufacturing sector, which is seen as the highest employer in other countries, is not showing the kind of promise that India expects. That is because the share of employment of the manufacturing sector is only about or is stagnant since the 1991 reforms. Further, the nature of jobs is also a worry, that is, informal workers are the highest workers in India. Also, there is growing informalization and there is lack of skill development, and the female labor force participation rates are very low. Now, what are the reasons for the jobless growth in India? Let us look at these after looking at the employment situation in India. So, as we have already seen that manufacturing sector, which plays a key role in providing employment in different economies, it has seen a stagnation in India. And accordingly, there has been a stagnation in the share of manufacturing sector to India's GDP, that is about 16%, and workforce, that is 12% since 1990s. That is, manufacturing sector's contribution to GDP has remained stagnant, and also its contribution to the employment market has also remained stagnant. Second issue is that there is presence of dwarf firms or small firms in the MSME sector, and this leads to lower productivity and poor job creation. Another issue here is the government's policies, and the government has been providing support in the form of capital to various industries. Now, an indirect effect of such kind of capital support that is provided by the government is that it has led to decreased cost of capital in the country and has led to increased cost of labor in the country. And this has incentivized the industries to be more capital intensive as compared to being labor intensive. That is, the industries in India are opting to be less labor intensive and are becoming more capital intensive. Further, there is lack of reform in the labor laws, and these are obsolete and archaic in nature. And only around 2% of India's workforce have received formal training, and there is a need for high skill sets in service sectors such as IT, the BPO, and the telecommunications, etc. So, accordingly, if there is lack of skill development in India, such people cannot be employed in various services sectors which require high skill sets. And finally, there is problem of disguised unemployment in the agriculture sector. That is, the agriculture sector is employing beyond its capacity. So these are few reasons for the jobless growth in India. Now, what are few suggestions or what measures should Government of India take in order to make this jobless growth into a jobful growth? So first and foremost strategy for promoting job creation can be focus of the government on labor intensive industries, for example, the textile industry and the leather industry. And these suggestions have been provided in the economic survey of past years. Second is that the government of India should also explore the potential of tourism sector, and it has the potential to create more than 40 million new jobs in next 5 years. Then there is a need for focusing on smart farming. And under such a smart farming, besides capitalizing on the inherent strengths of the agriculture sector in India, there is a need for moving out youth from the agriculture into agro and agro food processing export industries. So this is one way of reducing disguised unemployment in India. Then focus should also be on assemble in India. That is, by integrating assemble in India into the Make in India, India would create about 4 crore well paid jobs by 2025 and around 8 crore by 2030. That is, India should focus on becoming the assembling center of the world. Further, there is a need for incentivizing the infant MSME firms rather than incentivizing the dwarf firms, as we have seen that they are one of the important reasons for less job creation. Now, what has happened is that the government has been providing incentives to the firms irrespective of their age, and accordingly, most of the firms choose to remain dwarf firms and enjoy these incentives. So, accordingly, there is a suggestion that incentives should be limited to the initial 5 to 7 years of the firms only. Also, there is a need for effective implementation of labor reforms, and also there is a need for promotion of secondary agriculture, and this was suggested by the Dalwai panel on doubling the farmers' income. Now, secondary agriculture basically refers to various other jobs that can be created in the agriculture sector. For example, extension services or agriculture input industry can play a huge role in creation of jobs in the rural areas, and they have been termed as non-farm employment in the rural areas. Further, for enhancing the female labor force participation rates, the government needs to ensure that the implementation of Maternity Benefits Act 2017, the Sexual Harassment Act of Women at Workplace are implemented in their letter and spirit. And there is also a need to ensure the implementation of these important social legislations related to women employees in the informal sectors also. So, clearly, in this discussion, we have seen the employment situation in India, the kind of jobs that are being created, the quality of the jobs that are being created, and what are the reasons for India witnessing a jobless growth story. And accordingly, we have provided certain suggestions to improve this situation. And all these aspects can be used in writing the answers in the mains examination. And already we see that a question was asked in the mains examination of 2015 in the General Studies paper 3. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, the last article that we are discussing here is related to the indices that are used to measure inflation in the Indian economy. And in this line, this article reads, the WPI and CPI chart divergent paths even as post-lockdown trend reverses. Core inflation festers. So in this article, it is important for us to learn about the wholesale price index, that is WPI, the consumer price index, that is CPI, and also what is meant by terms like core inflation or the headline inflation. And as you can see in the prelims examination of 2020, a question has already been asked regarding the differences between CPI and the WPI. So accordingly, let us look at these important facts related to the two important indices that are used for measuring inflation in the economy, and also what is meant by terms like the headline inflation and the core inflation. Now, inflation simply refers to the general rise in the prices of the commodities or goods and services in an economy. Now, normal inflation or a normal growth in the prices of goods and services is good for economy. However, when this increase in the prices is uncontrolled, it leads to the fall in the value of money. That is, it leads to the fall in the purchasing power of the money over a period of time. And that is why all the governments across the globe are interested in measuring the levels of inflation in their economy. And accordingly, we come across two terms related to inflation regularly in the newspapers, and they are the core inflation and the headline inflation. Now, first, let us look at what are the key aspects of two important indices that are used to measure the inflation in the Indian economy, that is the wholesale price index and the consumer price index. And after that, we'll try and understand what is meant by core inflation or the headline inflation. Now, regarding wholesale price index, you should understand that it represents weighted average price index of a basket of goods. And this includes 697 items in this basket. So the average price of this basket of goods represents the wholesale price index. Now, it is useful because it captures the price changes in the prices of goods in bulk at the wholesale level, that is at the factory gate. And it includes price changes in goods only. So it is an important fact that it includes changes in the prices of goods only and not the services. Further, it is published by Office of Economic Advisors under the Department of Promotion of Industrial and Internal Trade under Ministry of Commerce and Industry. And the base year which is used as a reference is the 2011 and 2012. Further, currently the wholesale price index, as it records the prices at the factory gate, does not include the indirect taxes. Now, what are the components of the wholesale price index? That is, of which commodities the change in price is being measured through this wholesale price index. So it includes three types of items. First are the primary articles, second are fuel and power articles, and third are manufactured products. The primary articles have a weight of about 22.6%, and they include both food as well as non-food items. That is, food items can include the cereals, paddy, wheat, pulses, etc., and non-food items can include oilseeds, minerals, and crude petroleum. Fuel and power, as we all know, that can include the prices of crude oil, the energy, or various other electricity, etc., can be included in fuel and power. And then there are manufactured products, which can include the food manufactured products as well as non-food manufactured products, and they have the highest weightage in the wholesale price index. So if the wholesale price index is increasing in an economy, it shows that manufactured products are witnessing an increase in the price levels because it has the highest weightage in the WPI. Now, as compared to the wholesale price index, the CPI or the consumer price index tracks the changes in the price level at the consumer level, that is at the retail level, and it also measures the retail inflation. And as we have seen, wholesale price index tracks the changes of the price levels at the factory gate, and it does not include the indirect taxes. Further, this index is constituted of those goods that are sensitive to the consumers, and it includes both goods as well as services. Now, as there are different types of consumers in the Indian economy, and accordingly, different indices are used to measure price level at multiple consumer levels. And these include the Consumer Price Index for industrial laborers, Consumer Price Index for agricultural laborers, CPI for rural laborers, and CPI rural, urban, and CPI combined. Now, important aspect related to the CPI industrial laborers is that the dearness allowance is linked to this CPI industrial laborers. And revision in the Narega prices or Narega wage rates is linked to the CPI agriculture. And regarding the institution that publishes the CPI industrial laborers, agricultural laborers, and rural laborers, it is published by Labour Bureau under the Ministry of Labour and Employment. And related to this, a question was asked in the prelims of 2015. So the body which releases and compiles these indices is important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Then regarding the CPI rural, urban, and CPI combined, it is published by the National Statistical Office or the NSO. And regarding the components of the CPI, it includes food and beverages and tobacco, and it has the highest weightage, that is about 45.86%. And besides the food articles, there are different items which have different weights under the CPI. So this brings us to another important aspect for us from the preliminary examination point of view, that is the comparison between the WPI and CPI. So as far as the level of inflation is measured in the economy, the WPI measures inflation at the wholesale level or at the factory gate, while the CPI measures the inflation at the retail level. Now, WPI is calculated by Office of Economic Advisor under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, while CPI is measured or calculated by the NSO or the National Statistical Office under Ministry of Statistics and the Program Implementation. Base year for calculation of WPI is 2011 and 12, and base year for CPI is 2012. The categories of articles in the WPI include primary articles, manufactured products, and fuel and power, while in the CPI there are food and beverages and other. Of course, manufactured products have the highest weightage in WPI, while food and beverages have the highest weightage in CPI. Now, what is the impact of increase in the food items? So, if there is increase in the prices of food items in an economy or in the Indian economy, this increase in food prices would obviously lead to an increase in the WPI because it also includes the food articles. However, it would have less impact on WPI as compared to CPI, and that is because The food articles have lesser weightage in the WPI as compared to CPI, where the weightage of food articles is about 45%. So if there is increase in the food items in the economy, there would be larger impact on the CPI. That is, CPI will show higher increase as compared to the WPI. And last but not the least, an important factor, that is service sector is not included in the wholesale price index while it is included in the consumer price index. This brings us to the point as to what is meant by core inflation or the headline inflation. So core inflation is simply the inflation measure of those articles which are less volatile, and it excludes those articles which are likely to see or which face high volatility in their prices. That is, we all know that food articles and fuel both are such articles which face high amount of volatility in terms of their prices. And we all know that there is large amount of fluctuation in the price levels of the food and the fuel in the Indian economy. And accordingly, if you exclude the inflation related to food articles and the fuel in the economy, whatever inflation is left represents the core inflation. However, headline inflation refers to the change in the value of all goods in the basket. Now, headline inflation also represents that inflation measure which is used by the central bank of a country to counter or check the inflation in the Indian economy. So in India, earlier this used to be WPI because RBI used to bring out its monetary policy based on the wholesale price index. However, now the Reserve Bank of India uses CPI as the headline inflation, and accordingly, targets are set for inflation under the Monetary Policy Committee based on the inflation that is represented by the CPI or the Consumer Price Index. And if you look at this question, it reads, consider the following statements. First is that the weightage of food in the Consumer Price Index is higher than the wholesale price index, and we have clearly learned that this is a correct statement. Second is that the WPI does not capture changes in the prices of services, which CPI does, is also correct because WPI does not capture the services sector while CPI measures the change in the service sector as well. Third is that the Reserve Bank of India has now adopted WPI as its key measure of inflation and to decide on changing the key policy rates, which is incorrect because the Reserve Bank of India used to measure inflation based on WPI earlier. However, now it has adopted the CPI as the measure of inflation, and it bases its policy rates, or the key policy rates are changed based on the CPI inflation. And the correct answer is A, that is 1 and 2 only. So clearly we have learned some important facts related to WPI CPI, and also we have seen a comparative analysis of the WPI and CPI, about which already a question has been asked in the prelims of 2020. However, in the previous years already a lot of questions have been asked from this particular topic, and that is why it is very important for us for the upcoming prelims examinations. Now, besides the articles that we have discussed here, there were 3 other articles that appeared in the explained section of the Indian Express. However, these 3 articles were already covered in the DNS. For example, this article read, what do the amendments to the Juvenile Justice Act mean? And all the aspects of these amendments were discussed in the DNS of 18 February 2021. Then there was this article which was related to the policy related to geospatial data that was liberalized, and accordingly this was discussed in the DNS of 16 February 2021. The third article that appeared in the explained section was ICC ruling says it has jurisdiction in the Palestinian territories. Here's what it means. Now, from prelims examination point of view, what is important for us is the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction, and also why is India not a member of the ICC. And these aspects have been discussed in the DNS of 5th February 2021. So do go through these DNS videos and try and learn about these 3 other important topics that appeared in the explained section.